So video to our monitors have our eyes trained solely and squarely on the Supreme Court for this part of our broadcast. The Supreme Court move that upheld a ban of TikTok. That ban is scheduled to go into effect on Sunday. So literally TikTok for TikTok. Take a look at just some of what Justice Neil Gorsuch said in his opinion on the ruling. And this was in addition to the ruling. He said in part, whether this law will succeed in achieving its ends, I do not know. But the question we face today is not the law's wisdom, only its constitutionality. Given just a handful of days after oral argument and issue of an opinion, I, says Gorsuch, cannot profess the kind of certainty that I would like to have about the arguments and the record before us. All I can say, Gorsuch goes on to write, is that at this time and under these constraints, the problem appears real and the response to it not constitutional. So a reminder for our viewers right now, President Joe Biden, he signed this bipartisan bill from Congress in April of last year that then got kicked up to the high court. But now fast forward to today, President Joe Biden says he will not implement and he will not enforce the ban and will leave all those details squarely in the lap of Donald Trump. Now, lawmakers who voted for this bill reacted to the ruling on Capitol Hill today. We wanted to let you hear some of their initial reaction.
I think that's good from a rule of law point of view. I thought TikTok's arguments were exceptionally weak. Well, here are a couple things. Number one is that there's no need for TikTok to shut down if China will allow TikTok to be sold. But for months now, Beijing has refused to entertain what I understand are multiple offers, substantial offers to purchase TikTok from all kinds of different people. And it doesn't have to be owned by an American company. It just has to be owned by a company that is not subject to Beijing's control. That's the problem with TikTok now. Why is it a security threat was your question. And the answer is if you have TikTok on your phone currently, it can track your whereabouts. It can read your text messages. It can track your keystrokes. It has access to your phone records. And the problem with that is all of that information is available to and subject to inspection by the government in Beijing. And that's a massive, it's not just a national security threat, it's a personal security threat. So whatever you think of TikTok, you love it, you hate it. The issue with it is its national security problems. If it were sold, that'd be no problem.
The Supreme Court has rightly decided to uphold the requirement that TikTok be sold. I support an extension of time, which can be done by the president based on efforts to sell TikTok. TikTok should not be banned, it should be sold. China should not own it, but it should continue to exist in this country. The Supreme Court's decision opens the way for constructive efforts now to preserve TikTok, which everybody wants, but not under Chinese ownership, enabling that enemy of the United States to surveil, collect information, and present a threat to our national security.
I think it's a terrible idea to ban them from using it. And essentially it is a ban. They say, oh, it's not a ban, it's just a restriction. No, if you have like a company worth $100 billion and you say you got 2 days to sell your company or even 6 months, or then you threaten them with other things, oh, well, we'll say it's antitrust if Facebook wants to buy it or somebody else. There's not that many people with $100 billion sitting around. It's a terrible idea to do this. It's a terrible precedent to say we're going to shut down on speech. Some people say, oh, well, China bans apps. Yeah, they're an authoritarian country. That's why we're not China. We should not be banning speech. Terrible decision.
So CBS News crew is taking the temperature of senators there. Certainly more senators to talk to. But again, really, it all comes down to Donald Trump and all eyes are on him. What will he do? We're getting some clues on his social media platform today. He says right here, the Supreme Court decision was expected and everyone must respect it. My decision on TikTok will be made in the not too distant future, but the president goes on to say, I must have time to review the situation, so stay tuned. So let's continue the conversation and bring in CBS News Supreme Court reporter Catherine Cole. Catherine, good to have you with us. Break this down for us. No dissenting opinion. So what do you make of those remarks by Justice Gorsuch?
Yeah, no dissenting opinions. This is a resounding 9-0 defeat for TikTok and a decisive victory for the government, which argued that the national security concerns identified by Congress were sufficient for to impose this burden on TikTok. TikTok tried to make a First Amendment argument, and the court, speaking with one voice here and in an opinion without any author, sort of emphasizing that the court is unanimous here, said those First Amendment problems, we don't see them. I think you're right to note Justice Gorsuch's opinion. So he says, I agree with the bottom line. I'm on board. I just have a few additional thoughts of my own. And what I really pick up from him, he was maybe the most pro-free speech voice at oral argument last week. I think he's saying even considering my real hesitation to potentially step on free speech concerns, this law still passes constitutional muster. And he emphasizes, of course, this has been an incredibly expedited review process, right? Because of that January 19th deadline, this case came to the court quickly, briefing was quickly, oral argument was last week, and the decisions today. He's saying we didn't have a lot of time to look at it, and I'm concerned about free speech. But even there, on top of all of those things, I still think that this law is fine.
Well, and in recent hours, President Joe Biden signaling he's not going to enforce or implement this ban. He's essentially kicking it over to the president-elect. And it really bears mentioning that going into the inauguration, sitting close to the president-elect is one of TikTok's top bosses. Donald Trump has said he warmed to TikTok. So what are his options there, and how could that shape the future of the app?
Yeah, the ball is in President Trump's court at this point in time. So you can see why the TikTok CEO has been getting closer to him more recently. Here's how this is going to work on Sunday. The enforcement mechanism of this law really acts on the service providers, the app stores, the tech companies that work as the intermediary between you, the TikTok user, and TikTok itself. And if they essentially enable your access to TikTok, they face potential quite serious financial penalties. And so what Biden is saying is, we're not going to enforce that. What President Trump could do is say, as a matter of my administration's policy, we're also not going to enforce that. That's one path. See if that works. He could also try and lean on Congress to get this law repealed, although I don't think there's appetite on the Hill for that. Or he could try and, he's hinted at an executive order. It's unclear what that would look like, some sort of quasi-legislative attempt to assert his own power here. That would probably set the stage for future legal challenges. It would depend on the details there, which of course are unknown. As President Trump himself said, he needs time to review the situation. So it could be a minute before we find out.
Right, and he says he needs the time to reassess the situation, but you know, he is famously self-sold to the American public as a deal maker, as a businessman. So it'll be very fascinating to see what moves he makes that will be that pro-business mandate that he sold to voters on the campaign trail. I also have another question. So does what happened today with the Supreme Court really open the door for Congress to ban other social media platforms that maybe run or have a hand in governments that are seen adverse to the objectives of the United States?
Yeah, I think the Supreme Court is very wary of not doing that. And I'm looking at this first line. I've got the opinion right in front of me that says, we are conscious that that this case involves new technologies and that this challenging new context, it counsels caution on our part. What they're saying is this is narrow. We're not going to open the door for broad social media bans, First Amendment violations. This is this app, this law, this context, this weekend, and that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the conversation. It is fascinating when you see the Supreme Court vote unanimously on anything. That, in and of itself, is news-making.